But when we think about meditation, we're just so airy-fairy. We're so vague about what we think it really is, This incredibly sophisticated psychological skill that on the basis of much discipline, much ethical behavior, much intense practice, much purification, you're able to then completely subdue the grosser level of your consciousness, which means your conceptuality and your sensory. We have nothing like that in our culture, nothing whatsoever. So that you can access this more subtle level. They're the ones who literally discovered from their own experience the subtler level of their own mind. And this is the basis of all the Buddha's skills, all the Buddha's teachings, all the Buddha's psychology, all the Buddha's philosophy, all the Buddha's metaphysics. Because Buddha came out of that system, had completely perfected that skill. He'd gone through all the system of understanding karma, understanding the nature of self, all of these things. And then he went further. He said there's still something left to do, They'd elaborated, eradicated so much from the mind, but he said there's still, you're in samsara at the subtlest level. And so he diverged in his own direction, directly in relation to this ultimate nature of self. And in other words, all the teachings about emptiness, So that's referring to nirvana. So Buddha articulates what he means by rebirth and what causes suffering, and then he presents how to get rid of that suffering. So you get out of your samsara and you go to your nirvana. So one way of describing samsara, like I said, is in terms of being reborn in these different realms of existence from one level of suffering to another, as long as time exists, until you do something about it and stop the suffering and stop the causes of suffering. So you quit samsara and you get into your nirvana. You achieve your own cessation of suffering and its causes. So this stuff really, we think of Buddhism, we call it religion. And as soon as we say religion in our modern world, we see it as this weird, strange bunch of ideas way over the other side of the road. It's very mystical. You got to believe it. You can't prove it. We have these very weird, superstitious ideas about what we think religion is, But the Buddha, it's because he's not a creator. Therefore, we have to deduce it wasn't from revelation that he got all these ideas, and that's exactly what we think of as religion. We've really got to think this stuff through, I always quote this again, all the time, A few years ago in New Zealand, one man, a scientist, in fact, said, and it was a perfect question, if you have the view of a creator religion, which is the usual view we have of religion. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? It's a perfect question, but it really points to what we assume about what's called spiritual, what we assume about what we call religious. And this is such a powerful point, I tell you. We assume because there's a being called a creator who didn't get created himself, who is just the nature, has always existed, is the source of the universe, is the source of everything, is the boss, punishes and rewards and runs the show. And basically that's what we mean by God. So that's the usual view we have of religion. So as soon as you ask a Tibetan, for example, are you religious? Well, of course I am, they'll say. And you'll say, oh, I see, you pray to God, do you believe in God? And they'll laugh and say, of course not. So we're very confused because we equate or we conflate religious with creator, not the Buddhist view whatsoever. So the Buddha's view then, if he doesn't assert a creator, therefore he's not in the normal sense of religion. Therefore, where did these teachings come from? Who revealed them to him? And when I said to this scientist, would you ask Freud or would you ask whoever? Who? Einstein? Well, Mr. Einstein, who revealed the teachings about relativity to you, everybody would laugh. And they did, in fact. And he laughed, everybody laughed. Because we know immediately we say the word scientific. We mean, you have your intelligent hat on. It's something you investigate. It's something you analyze. And it's something you prove. Well, that is the approach in Buddhism. Even if we're Buddhists, it's very surprising to us, because we assume it's mystical and beyond and unable to be known and unable to be proved. This is totally, utterly a misconception. And the more we can understand this, if we like to follow Buddhism, the more we'll be very grounded and on the earth and we'll use our intelligence, So of course there are levels of what's called revelation. But because Buddha asserts these subtler levels of mind with these amazing Indians discovered centuries ago, that you can access these subtler levels of mind, which in the long term, you must have single-pointed concentration, because then only can you really cut the root of all the rubbish. So there are levels of this in Buddhism, and all the great bodhisattva yogis, for example, they can access the Buddha directly in their subtle mind in meditation. So if you like, that's revelation, but but the usual view we have is that religion by definition is from on high. It can't be proved. You have to believe it. That's the way, that's the notion we have about religion that is not like that in Buddhism. It's extremely important to understand this. So clearly then, if what Buddha talks about, and it's what we're going to discuss here, what is suffering? What is happiness? What are the causes? We're going to talk about karma. We're going to talk about the nature of mind. We're going to talk about emptiness. All of these things are what we must discuss. And we're going to look at samsara and nirvana. In other words, we're going to look at the Buddha's views of reality. Then we have to ask the question, well, it's a powerful question he asked. Where did it come from? I mean, that's a brilliant question, but that's only how we ask it when it comes to religion. If you're sitting there with Einstein and he's telling you about relativity, which is really complex, you don't say, please, Mr. Einstein, where did this information come? Think of this, it's important. You don't even say to him, where does this information come from? Think about this. You would not say that. You know where it comes from, his own intelligence. He has observed the way the world is, and that's what a scientist is. They take the world that they see, they use their intelligence, they unravel it, they unpack it, they investigate it, and they come up with certain findings. And then they prove their findings, and then they present their findings. We get this. Well, that's Buddha, not a fraction more or less than that. It might surprise us, putting it in such blunt words, you know. But if Buddhism isn't that, and then it's the same as any other religion. It's coming from God on high. And I'm not trying to diminish that. That's fine if you have that view, you know. I'm not discussing, I'm not complaining. So then if Buddha is not a creator, or he isn't the recipient of a creator's knowledge, he's not telling us what he had revealed in a dream or a vision, then where did the information come from? Well, it's exactly the same as Einstein. Buddha used his own powers of observation, but the crucial point here we must remember, because he is asserting subtler levels of cognition in this mind of ours that we do not assert in our culture. We only talk about the grosser level, conceptuality and sensory, which is what we need, which is what the function of the brain, independence upon a brain. That's the stuff, that's our knowledge in the West. When we talk about the mind, we mean, if we investigate the mind in the West, we investigate the brain. Buddha doesn't mind about the brain, but that's not his expertise. You ask these dudes back then where their brain is, they would not have a clue. But they know their mind, which is the internal workings, the actual cognitive process itself of how we think and feel and act to degrees of subtlety. These Indians discovered by creating this incredible skillful technique called single pointed concentration. So we've got to posit this as a possibility in order to even begin to understand where Buddhism comes from. It comes from Buddha's observation. So, and we say, oh, you mean Buddha talks about reincarnation. You mean I have to believe in reincarnation? Well, you don't say to Einstein, oh, you mean I have to believe in relativity? He would laugh at you. Of course you don't. We have to assume first, this is a fundamental point. If you're going to listen to Einstein before you even go there, and let's say you decide you're going to follow Einstein and see what he's talking about, you've got to have confidence that the man knows what he's talking about. You've got to have confidence he's not some kind of peanut. You've got to have confidence that he's done his research and he's a valid person. Exactly the same with Buddha. So then once you start with Einstein, you'd think you'd like to also understand relativity. Where do you start? Well, you start at junior school with mathematics. You learn about mathematics and how to add up and how to subtract. This is obvious. But you don't do that, going to spend years to get to where you prove relativity to yourself if you're not confident that Einstein's a valid person. It's the same with the Buddha. You've got to do your research. So therefore, the attitude you would have if you want to study Einstein and get to prove relativity for yourself, know it for yourself, not just rely on someone else who knows it, then you have to have confidence in Einstein. Same here. So if you want to say you want to be a Buddhist, you're going to join the Buddha's thing, you've got to be confident that Buddha seems a reasonable person. So you do your research. You read the books, you read the history books, you talk to people, and it's encouraging. If you look around the world and see other people who have studied Einstein, you can see that it gives you confidence, doesn't it? That he must be a reasonable okay. They look okay. They're doing well. So you use your intelligence and then you start taking it. Basically, you take your relativity, you take emptiness, karma, all these things that Buddha talks about as your working hypothesis. So you engage in it experientially. That's the way you be a Buddhist. To say you merely believe in karma, believe in reincarnation, believe in suffering and its causes, believe in Buddhism, it's better than nothing. I mean, Buddha's an okay guy. He probably won't mislead you, but to merely believe it, you've got to understand this. It's an absurd load of nonsense. What good is it? Think about it. It's like saying you believe in mathematics. I'm happy you do. Lots of people know how to count, so you can manage to merely believe in mathematics and get away with it in life, because most people can do it for you. But if you want, or like saying you believe in botany, I'm happy you believe in botany because you can see it works. But if you don't know botany, you will not get a garden. If you don't know how to count, you cannot go buy 5 oranges for your mother. So you're stuck in ignorance. This is the approach here. So to believe in karma is useless. To believe in mathematics, to believe in all the Buddhist views is better than nothing, but it won't get you far. Nothing will change inside you. You've got to engage in it slowly, first intellectually, taking it as your working hypothesis, and then as you go along, because it's a working hypothesis, you start to engage in it, and you start step by step, junior school, high school, university, postgraduate, and each step of the way, you're proving it. You're ticking the boxes as you go, just like any body of knowledge. But this is not how we think of spiritual, is it? It's quite shocking to us, quite surprising to us that it should be done on so step by step. But that's exactly the right approach, you know. And as the Dalai Lama says to us modern people, if you do decide to engage in Buddha's teachings, in Buddha's methodology, and then you go at each point, ticking the boxes as you go, and then you find at some point that actually you've proved that he's wrong, well, of course you must reject him. Of course you must. That's a reasonable thing to do. So it's not about just merely belief. It's not about just feeling good about Buddhism. Better than nothing. I mean, this is where the biggest problem, I think, in our culture, we really confuse liking Buddhism with knowing Buddhism. So in this life, here we are sitting in this room, whether it's in our own house or not, we've obviously got some connection with what we call Buddhism. So it's sort of like as soon as you hear it, you might have gone, well, I like that. It just makes sense, you know. That's because you've got a familiarity with it from the past, Buddha would say. But it's easy to say you like it. But what good is that? You've got to start learning it and actually actively engaging in it. That's where you get the benefit. That's where the changes will come, because there's an intensely full-on full immersion kind of, you know, practice. So, okay, right now then, the Buddha would say we are in samsara, and he's got methods for us to get out of samsara and achieve our own nirvana, our own cessation of suffering and its causes. There's many ways you can present the whole approach of Buddhism, and the most fundamental, the most experiential, the starting point, if you like, is in terms of its being a method for how to get rid of suffering and to get happy. So why that? It seems almost cute, you know. Well, it's kind of profound. Look around the world. Look at yourself. Look at your sisters and your mummy and your dog, the monkeys, the ants. We can deduce every single sentient being, without exception, spontaneously, instinctively, without being taught, wants happy feelings and doesn't want suffering feelings. This is so evident, and it's so taken for granted that we don't even question. And if you think about it, if we analyze, one way of framing our entire life is in terms of trying to find methods of stopping suffering and getting happiness. That motivates mostly what we do, why we eat that food and not this one, why we marry that boy and not that one, why we go to that country and not this one, because we think, no, I'll be happy there. That'll make me happy. You don't eat food that makes you vomit every day. Well, I mean, we might be if we're stupid because we're attached to it. We're dumb. But, you know, usually you observe your response to something and then you avoid it if it makes you miserable. And, well, ideally, but let's look at why we don't half the time. So this is really a very practical issue. Buddha says basically this is what drives every sentient being. You know, everybody wants happiness and everybody doesn't want suffering. And all Buddha's saying is, hey guys, hi, I found a method. That's all. That's all he's saying to us. So what is that? Let's look at it. Let's look at it. Okay. So there's Four Noble Truths. It's his first teaching. It's where he presented this. He presents this. Okay. After he got enlightened himself, after he'd been through all this amazing system as a Hindu, all the different amazing Hindu systems, and then he went in his own direction, kept moving. He finally removed from his mind all the delusions. He became what's called a Buddha. And then he sat around, you know, thinking he should teach it or not. So he went from Bodh Gaya to Varanasi, probably a few days walk. He met his old disciples, 5 of them, and then he gave his first teaching in Bodh Gaya, in Varanasi. Okay. So, I mean, it's in the text, in the literature, it's presented in a highly complex way. Let's keep it really simple, really down to earth, you know, really ordinary. So the first one is basically there is suffering. The second is there are causes. And the third is, guess what, folks, you can get rid of it. And the fourth is how to do it. Pretty simple. Okay. So there's many ways of presenting all this, but like I said, let's keep it simple, okay? So the first one is there is suffering. And already here, this is where Buddha radically differs from the rest of us. He presents suffering in different ways. And one way is in terms of 3 levels of suffering. And the first one is called the suffering of suffering. The second one is called the suffering of change. And the third one is called all-pervasive suffering. So one way of presenting this, I don't want to make it too complicated, but one way of presenting, like I mentioned before, is the big picture point of view. So the big picture point of view, which is often kind of weird for us Westerners, is, you know, it's a bit abstract for us, but I'll mention it nevertheless. But then I'll talk about it in a way in terms of this life we've got right now, and we can really get it when we come to that. Okay. So the first way of presenting is like Buddha's worldview. As far as he's concerned, what he has observed is there are countless trillions of semchens, Tibetan, mind possessors. It's a lovely phrase. We translate it as sentient being. I think I prefer mind possessor. It's so delicious, you know. There are countless mind possessors. Trillions upon trillions, Buddha has observed with his own mind, directly. Keep remembering this. Second, you can divide all of those minds into 2 categories. Those that are in samsara and those that are out of samsara. Speaking very simply. And the crucial distinguishing characteristic between the ones in and the ones out is the accomplishment of the cutting of the root of the neurotic self. And we'll go into this later. Don't worry about it now. So all the ones that were in samsara, we can divide these trillions of sentient beings into 3 levels of mental existence. They call them realms. So this is very much coming from the experience of these amazing Indians before the Buddha. The Hindu system, and there are many systems, there are many different philosophical views, and I don't know the difference between them, but the peak for them, which was liberation, was when you're in this subtlest state of the deepest concentration, having accomplished this amazing technique known as single-pointed concentration. And you've removed all the grosser levels of suffering. You've removed the grosser levels of being born in the suffering realms, and you're at this subtle state of deepest absorption. And then roughly speaking, and they call that the formless realm. So basically at that level, these certain great yogis have achieved this subtle state of deep absorption. And as far as they're concerned, that's liberation. They're out of all the suffering. Then you've got a slightly grosser level called the form beings. And they're slightly grosser, but their minds are still pretty subtle. But then you have what's called the desire realm. And that's got 6 suburbs in it, okay? If you like. Or 6 realms. These are real sentient beings with real mental experiences, all coming along with a certain level of external physicality and external experiences. So these 6 suburbs in this desire realm, you've got all of them are along the spectrum of the most intense bliss, happiness, to the most intense suffering. Okay, so the blissful ones, that they're called the God realms. There's a couple of those. These are real states of being, by the way, not just analogies, not just kind of fantasy. They're actual beings living in a certain state of their own, utterly blissful states. There's a couple of these. And I think it seems to me over the centuries, humans, you know, there's the Muslims, there's the Australian Aborigines, there's all the Americans. Every piece of the planet has had human beings quite a while. And it seems to me if you look at all of them, many of them have looked into the meaning of life. How amazing, you know. So there's so many viewpoints, aren't there, over the centuries about reality. I mean, you look at them, there's Muslims and Christians, and every country you go to, you scrape the surface, you're going to find a group of people who were there before, and you're going to discover they had a view about reality. I mean, if you listen to the Australian Aboriginals' view about reality, I mean, they were there minding their own business for 40,000 years until the white people came along. And you listen to their view, they call it the dream time. It's so abstract, it's so unusual, you can't believe it. So wherever there have been humans using our intelligence, we've come up with certain experiences about reality. And it seems to me the Muslims, the Christians, the Buddhists have seen many similar things over the centuries. So that, so the Christians would call this state heaven. The Muslim would call it paradise, Hindus call it something else. It's a state of mind, and this, for the Buddha, is a real existent state of mind at a subtler level, and it's blissfully joyful. It's extremely blissful. We're going to go to the causes later, okay? But this is just stating. And it's a state of actual beings. Now, further down the spectrum, further down the suburbs, there's a couple of those. The third one down in terms of happiness is called a human realm. So clearly, these dudes in the God realms have their subtle physical energy is like subtle light. The experiences they have are utterly blissful because, and we're going to go to the reasons about this. This is all about karma, which we're going to get into, fundamental to understand karma. So humans, we can see we don't have bodies of light. Believe us, we've got, walking sewers for bodies. But there's something about, but still, nevertheless, there's some relative happiness if we compare. Now, further down the spectrum, in the worst suburbs, and there are 3 of these, and they keep getting worse in terms of suffering, is the animal realm, the spirits, and the hell realm. So these are actual beings, sentient beings like you and me, who are experiencing intense levels of different suffering, all the way from suffering to happiness. There's a spectrum, They're all living beings, they're all actual beings, and they all have certain experiences, physical and mental. So this is the desire realm, and clearly we're in that one. So we're in samsara, being reborn in these different realms of existence, back and forth, So this is the suffering. So the suffering of suffering in that framework, the suffering of suffering refers to the lower realms. The suffering of change refers to the happy realms, which is the God realms and the humans. So, and we'll go into this in a minute. And then you've got the all-pervasive suffering, which is referring to the form and formless realms, these subtle beings with no grosser levels at all, roughly speaking, that have just subtle, deep kind of absorption. So they don't have the first 2 kinds of suffering, but they're still in samsara. They're still in samsara. So that's the bigger picture. We won't go into this one much, but let's look at these, at least the first 2. Let's look at these first 2 levels of suffering in terms of our own human life. Then we'll really understand it, okay? And we'll really get it. Okay, so the suffering of suffering, if we look in this world, we can see, it's very simple, the suffering of pain, the suffering of something. Suffering is a very simple way to put it. We'll get it immediately. It's when the bad things happen. Think about it. Think about your life up until now. When bad things happen, from the most mild kind of slight knee ache to the most intense pain of suffering of cancer, or to your husband leaving you, or being tortured or abused, we can all see on this planet and in our lives, we can see, forget other people, our own lives, and we can look the past up to now, and we can identify certain of our experiences as being the ones when the bad things happen, the ones we don't want. That's what we mean by suffering. That's it for us. That's all we mean by suffering. But that's just the first level of suffering for the Buddha. There are these 2 other levels, and they're way more subtle and more nuanced. It's a very different approach. And to understand this next level of suffering, and to these first 2, forget the third one, but to understand the first 2 really helps us understand what Buddha's saying. It really helps us, grounds us in Buddha's view about the world. So, okay, the first kind of suffering, look in your lives, is the suffering of suffering, when the bad things happen. And if you think about it, like I said before, we spend all our lives trying to avoid those. Even the slightest pain in your knee when you're sitting, you immediately move your leg so you stop the pain. As soon as you hear a loud noise, you try to make it go away. As soon as you eat an ugly piece of food, you stop eating it. A second we have a moment of unhappiness in this gross level of suffering, we instantaneously, without analysis, try to avoid it. Everybody's this way. Everybody's this way. Then you've got the second kind of suffering. This where initially is quite depressing for us. It's shocking, actually. The second kind of suffering, unfortunately, which he calls the suffering of change, and it sounds kind of boring, but let's go into it and see the logic of it. It's really depressing because that's what we mean by happiness. Unbelievable. That's what we mean by happiness. It's incredible. That's what we mean by happiness. So then that's the stuff that we try. So what is happiness? It's when the good things happen. So look at your life in the most simple way. When you eat the cake that is tasty, you run towards it. When you eat the cake that's ugly, you go away from it. When you have the slight pleasant feeling, you know, when a pleasant feeling in your body, you go towards it. When you have an unpleasant feeling, you go away from it. It's so literally instinctive, virtually instinctive. We would call it that scientifically. So what runs all this? What's the analysis of all this? What's Buddha's analysis of all this? What is the cause of those suffering experiences? Why do we have suffering experiences? It's a really good question, because we know when really bad things happen, one of our first questions is, why is this happening to me? And then we see terrible suffering in the world, and our first question is, why is this happening? And I think, frankly, in our world, this alone is one of the major reasons we have so much mental suffering, because we don't have an answer. We don't know why bad things happen. I mean, it's very interesting. We might have an analysis. If someone punches you in the nose, you sort of think you know why you're suffering. It's because Fred punched you in the nose. But the real question we ask is, but why did he punch me? Like, you just met this bloke on the street, out of the blue, seemingly you get a punch in the nose. So it's all very fine to say, well, Fred punched you because his mother punched him, etc., etc. That doesn't really satisfy us, because the real question we're asking, why is it happening to me? And then the feeling we have is, I don't deserve it. This is a powerful way we respond. So we should look at those assumptions. We have this assumption we don't know why it happens, and we have this assumption we don't deserve it. So this is the basis, I think, of so much of our extra suffering. I mean, it's bad enough being punched in the nose, but the extra pain we have, the mental pain, is we don't know why it's happening, and that really tortures us. This is right now, for example, with all this business that's going on in the world. So much of the suffering and anxiety and panic that people are having, forget the overwhelm being poor, forget getting sick, but just the panic of why is this happening? It kind of fills us with terror, you know. So the suffering we often have is because we don't have explanations. We don't have reasons. We don't have logic. So what we're going to do here is present Buddhas. He's not asking you to believe him. Believe me, he's allowed to tell you exactly what he likes, but he does not say, you'd better believe me, which is how we think of religion. He is not saying that. He says, this is what I found to be so, just like Einstein. You can take it or leave it. You can do what you like with it. So let's present what Buddha says, okay? Here's the explanation of it. So forget the third kind of suffering, all pervasive. Forget that one, okay? Let's look at these two, because these are what preoccupy our lives. So suffering, as I said, a simple way of putting it is when the bad things happen. And the suffering of change is what we mean by happiness, which is when the good things happen. And we crave for the good things and we can't bear the bad things. Look at your life. It's a way of presenting everybody's life to one degree of another, isn't it? It's kind of really simple. It's very evident, you know. Well, let's give a Buddhist analysis of it, okay? So to do that, to really comprehend this, we've got to go to the second noble truth, because that's the first one. There is suffering, Buddha says, and he articulates it at three levels. The suffering of suffering, the bad things, the suffering of change, which we mean by the good things, and the third one, all pervasive, and we'll discuss that later. So if we can look at this, we can see, just even a little bit, but to really give meaning to this, we've got to look at what Buddha says are the causes, and this gives us incredible ability to understand it all, you know. So the second noble truth is there are causes. So we just take the first kind of suffering, okay? This is the first one, the bad things happening. Let's look at this. So now, if we think in our lives, when a bad thing happens, look at what analysis do we have at the moment, okay? So the analysis might be, you've got a headache, you know you're suffering because you've got a headache. But why you've got the headache, because, you know, we can't stand headaches. But then you ask the question, well, what's the cause of the headache? Then the first thing we have to try and find something physical, the thing we ate, the weather, the temperature, who knows? And sometimes we might be able to solve it temporarily with a pill. Sometimes we might get to the root of it physically, and we might even be able to fix it. How amazing. But we can often see, very often we can't. We can't find the cause, you know, which is very painful. But we do want a cause, and that's a completely logical question. When you have something go wrong, what caused it? And it's really clear, isn't it? Once you establish the cause of a problem, whatever it might be, that implies the solution. Once you've got the cause, first you identify the problem, then you identify the cause, and that implies the solution. Once you've got the cause, you've already got the solution. It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear, you know. So we're talking the big picture here. of all the bad things happening to us, which is the first kind of suffering in this human realm of ours. Forget the other way of looking at things. What, as far as Buddha concerned, what are the causes of why do bad things happen to me? But it's really important we talk about this, that we talk about it also in the context of why do good things happen, because the logic is the same. And often when we hear about Buddha's view of why bad things happen, we get very obsessed with why bad things happen. But, you know, the Buddha's view, which of course is karma, I'm going to go into this, it also applies to the good things. So in other words, the law of botany doesn't just refer to weeds. The law of botany is an explanation for why there are flowers and herbs as well, which is happiness. So Buddha's got a view of what are the causes of suffering, and you flip that over and it implies exactly the same way, what are the causes of happiness? The law is the same law. So it's really important at this point, because we get so neurotic about bad things happening, you know, that we can't hear it properly. So what's Buddha's explanation for why bad things happen, why good things happen? Well, he's fundamentally different from the Christian teachings, the Muslim teachings, absolutely with certainty from the materialist philosophical teachings. Quite different view, you know. So as far as we're concerned, you know, if like say Martin punches me in the nose or something, why are you suffering, Robina? The answer is immediate and easy to understand. Martin punched me. We don't go further than that, you know. So as far as I'm concerned, there's one cause of my suffering. But look at this. You see me smiling. Why are you happy, Robina? Oh, Martin just gave me a gift. And no one's going to question that either. So normally speaking, in our world, if we look at our own assumptions right now, which we never question, in other words, looking at what we think are the causes of suffering and the cause of happiness. One level of it is it's other people out there. Or why are you happy, Robina? Oh, the weather's beautiful. Why are you suffering, Robina? I just ate an horrible food and I'm sick. So for us, the assumption we have deep in the bones of our being, which is clearly reiterated and explained by our whole philosophical materialist view, which we call science, and this is certain at one level of reality, there's no question, we look at the external and the physical. So as far as I'm concerned, Martin is the main cause of my suffering, but I also blame Martin for my happiness, don't I? This is the interesting point, because as far as I'm concerned, there's one cause and it's called Martin. So obviously, if I believe Martin is the main cause of my suffering, I will try to I will try to either harm him in return or hope he suffers, or at least I'll keep away from him. Two, if he's the cause of my happiness, the exact opposite. I will run towards him because I want more of that, please. Isn't it? We know this. So let's look at the logic of this, Buddha's explanation of it. So there's two things. One is, for the Buddha, there's two main causes of a moment of suffering and two main causes of that moment of happiness. And the shocking thing is, Martin is neither of them. This is a shock. The two main causes are in oneself. It's very direct. It's very personal. There are two main causes of that moment of happiness. Martin indeed does play a role. As we can see in the world, the whole universe exists according to the law of cause and effect. And there are thousands of things that have to come together to produce anything. So just to produce a cup, you'd have a long list of components, causes. To produce a flower, you'd have many causes. To produce a moment of happiness, you'd have to have many causes put together. But Buddha narrows it down to two. And the two are the main ones, such that if I take responsibility, if I change those and I implement those, I can be guaranteed I'll get future happiness. And if I locate these two main causes of suffering, and by working on those, I can guarantee that I will stop future suffering. That's the approach. In other words, the problem is suffering of suffering, having bad things happen. The solution, the cause is the two things. Now, this is the Buddha's view. There are two causes, and they're both inside me. One is past, they're both in the past. One is called karma, and one is called delusion. So one is called karma, which means action. So simplistically speaking, an action done in the past based upon a neurotic state of mind. These two together sowed a seed in my mind that will not go astray unless I do something about it, but will eventually ripen when all the conditions come together. 2.5 lives later, and I meet this peanut called Martin, and he punches me in the nose. So speaking simply, the karma ripened. The seed I planted 2.5 lives ago, one, an action of, in this case, of my body, and two, motivated by a neurotic state of mind, attachment, anger, you name it. And we'll unpack all this. Speaking very simply, okay? That is the two main causes of why I'm now experiencing this moment of suffering. Exactly the same as the moment of happiness. One, a past action based upon a virtuous motivation. And that seed is now ripening as my experience of the result of that, of Martin being kind to me. I mean, speaking very simply. So now, before we go any further, it's really the first thing we hear when we hear this explanation. We hear it as reward and punishment. This is very deep in our bones, and it's very fascinating. We can't hear karma properly because we hear it as punishment and reward. It's so fascinating. And I'm not criticizing this, but this dualistic view. The Buddha says we've made it up, actually. But this is exactly how we think of in religion. So, you know, again, I always quote this, my Jesuit priest friend. When I asked him what by definition is a sin, by definition a sin is doing what God said not to do. And that is totally appropriate if you're a Christian. I respect that. It's powerful. Why? Because God is the creator, God is the boss, God made the universe, God made the laws, God made me, and God is to be obeyed. And so removing yourself from God is doing what he said not to do. Being close to God is doing what he does do. So we think in simple terms of punishment and reward. That's how we think. That's how we think. Don't blame your Jewish mummy or your Catholic mother for that. That's how this is Buddha says, this comes from ego. We've made up that dualistic concept of punishment and reward. It's very fascinating. And even if you're not religious, you think about it, in your mother's household, when you're a little girl and mummy says, don't do that. Your first question is, why not? And her first answer, we know, is the same as God, because I say so. So that's our view of morality. We have this dualistic view, and you think about it, since the time we're born, here we are trying to be good girls, not doing what daddy said not to do, trying not to do what the government said not to do, trying not to do what the police say not to do, trying not to do what the church said not to do. We're spending our lives checking up to make sure we behave nicely and do the good action and don't do the bad action. Why? Because we want reward and we don't want punishment. It's primordially deep inside us. This is exactly how ego works, you know, and we're going to go into this in more depth. This is the philosophy of attachment and anger. So that's how we live our lives. Well, Buddha's view is not that. It's like a childish attitude. It's got nothing to do with punishment and reward. Karma is a natural law. In Buddhism, there's no creator, there's no punisher, there's no rewarder. It's a natural law. And natural law is a powerful concept, you know. Natural law is a powerful concept. It's simply what happens. That's what we mean by science. There's God's law and there's natural law. There's no concept of God's law in Buddhism. Because he's not a creator. So there's no concept of punishment and reward. We've got to hear this because we hear karma like that. The second we hear that Martin punched me because I must have punched him before, we get completely depressed. Oh, you mean I was a bad person before? We immediately run to that, you know. It's very fascinating. So this is Buddha's explanation from his own observation at the subtle level of his own mind, which implies obviously he can see the past and the future. We have to deduce this possibility, and that fits with the Buddha's view of the mind, that basically every sentient being every millisecond, every sentient being is experiencing the fruits of their past actions. And if it's called a happy experience, that's the fruit of virtue. And if it's called an unhappy experience, that's the fruit of non-virtue. It's kind of got an incredible psychological logic to it. It's got nothing to do with punishment, nothing to do with reward, nothing to do with being seen to be a good girl or a bad girl, you know. It's very dualistic. And that's how we believe already. Buddha does not have that view whatsoever. So this takes time to think about, and then therefore to take it on board, the learning from it, you know. So the simple principle Buddha is saying is of karma, this natural law that runs the universe. The word karma means action. It's the natural law that runs all these minds. So all these minds, a few more points about the mind, just to get Buddha's view, consciousness is not physical. This moment, this person that we are, our consciousness is like a river of mental moments. It didn't start in our mummy's womb. It is not the handiwork of a creator or our mummy or daddy or the brain. It's a very shocking concept. This is the Buddha's view. It goes back and back and back, and will continue when we die. This is a fundamental truth for the Buddha. And again, he didn't make it up. It's his observation. It's his observation, you know. So consciousness, your mind is beginningless, your mind is endless, one. And this law of karma, this natural law that he didn't make up, he's observed it and labeled it, like botany. Some clever person has looked at gardens and articulated what he's seen and presented it as a series of, codified it as a series of laws. That's the Buddha, you know. And if you prove he's wrong, then go for it, baby. Buddha will be the first person to hear, because he's looking for the truth. So every millisecond of what we experience, moment by moment by moment, speaking just simply now at these two levels of happiness and suffering, if we analyze really carefully in a graph, just one day, forget your entire life, you could have a graph mapping it in terms of happiness and suffering, you know, moment by moment. If you really had such analysis, you could. We could do that. I mean, there's mildest moments of slight displeasure to the most intense moments. There's the mildest moments of joy to the most intense ecstasy and rapture. Well, if we're so lucky to have a bit of rapture every now and again, you know. So we can understand happiness and suffering. It sounds so simple. But the crucial point here to remember, and if we've got time, we'll go into this, we must, because we're looking into the mind, as is Samsara and Nirvana, we must look into the mind, how it functions. You know, the Buddha's view of the word happiness and suffering is very interesting in this. You check. If I say, you know, there's, you know, where's somebody? There's Helena. There's Helena. Hello, love. There you are. I can see you. Let's say I say to Helena, yo, you look so happy, Helena. Tell me about your happiness. I guarantee you she will describe the external events, the beautiful weather, the lovely food, how kind the person was to her. But and the second time I say to Helena, tell me about your suffering. Why are you? And she'll describe the events. You check this. This is really profound. It's a complete mistake. They are the events. It's true. The cake did make you vomit. The boyfriend did hit you. The weather is beautiful, but we're so fixated on the external. We're so addicted to the external, and that's reinforced in our scientific models that describe all the causes of our happiness in external terms and describe all the causes of our suffering in external terms. Then that's what we are occupied with. But the Buddha doesn't answer like that. Happiness is a state of mind. Suffering is a state of mind. It includes the sensory, but it's mental and sensory. It's the mind that experiences happiness. A cake is not happiness. A kiss is not happiness. They're the external events that trigger these mental states. But we're so addicted to the external, we don't even notice the mind, you know. And that's because we have attachment and aversion, which we'll go into later. So happiness and suffering are in the mind. This is powerful. So when a person, based upon what's in their mind, you know, steals 20 euros, let's say, 20 krona, the hand does the job of taking 20 krona, but the mind is what's running it. What's in the mind is the thing saying, I will steal that 20 krona. And then based on whatever motivation is there, greed, attachment, or whatever, it's the mind that causes happiness. The hand does the wishes of the mind and gets the action. But the mind is what creates karma. And therefore you will experience it in the mind as well as in the external world. But the experience will be first and foremost, it will be triggered in your mind, the experience. So let's say you steal 20 euros based upon attachment, and that sows a seed in your mind, then of course nothing's going to go astray. No seed goes astray. That eventually will multiply, and then later in the future, you will experience the result of that. And the result will be external, because the result will be external. Your money will be stolen, and then it will trigger unpleasant feelings in your mind. When someone punches you in the nose, you know, that triggers an unpleasant feeling in your mind. And the cause of that is your past action. You set yourself up for it. And this is not a concept that we don't not understand. We get it when it comes to physical health. You think about that. We get it when it comes to nutrition. We don't think that is moralistic. With nutrition, you know very well, you eat food that's really wrong, and you end up with a bellyache. You smoke a cigarette, you might get cancer. You eat too much sugar, you might get diabetes. We know the results come to us from actions we do, and we don't think of ourselves in moralistic terms. We just go, what a fool I was, and we try to change our habit. But as soon as we hear that I'm suffering now because I was a naughty, because I got angry in the past, we get guilty and neurotic. You mean I was a bad person? It's very painful for us. But it's the same logic. You go to your doctor, and she says, she recommends you stop smoking. Why? Because look at the result. And she shows me pictures of hideous lungs. I don't freak out and think she's punishing me. That's hilarious. How dare you say that to me? You're going to punish me with bad lungs if I smoke a cigarette? You don't say that. You thank her for warning you of the terrible results that will come to you from your foolish action. Well, that's the Buddha. He's the same as a doctor. He's seen from his own observation the results of doing certain actions. That's all. And his view is longer. It goes from past lives. The principle is the same. It's not that complicated. And it's got nothing to do with moralistic, That comes from other views we've got, and we impose upon it that. It's the consequences of our past actions. So if we're brave enough, we'll be so delighted. Well, thank you, Buddha, for telling me why now I get stolen from. Now I know why. Amazing. So conclusion, stop doing it, dear. Stop smoking. It's obvious. Stop creating more causes for more cancer. Stop creating more causes to be more stolen from. It's taking responsibility. But if we look into our world and our lives naturally, we are addicted to feeling like an innocent victim, and we want to find everything possible to get us off the hook because it's someone else's fault. This is very instinctive. This is ego, It's very powerful. It's very fascinating. There's no sense of responsibility. So when we really start to understand karma, and of course we're going to go to details, we really get a profound sense of responsibility, of ownership. It cuts so much fear. It explains things to us. We learn to lessen attachment and lessen anger and lessen drama because we're taking responsibility. We're realizing that we are the cause of our own reality, of our own mind, our own life, our own experiences, our own happiness, our own suffering. It's a very powerful concept, It really cuts that dualistic sense, as we all believe, well, I'm an innocent victim. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. Ego, that's the main voice of ego, is to do everything impossible, everything it can to get off the hook. It's very powerful. It's very interesting to look into this. So the Buddha's view of karma, then, the law of karma, a natural law of cause and effect, that every millisecond of any being's experience, speaking simply, is either going to be a suffering experience or a pleasant one. That's it. Ants and monkeys as well. Forget the third level. Forget that. So then he says there are causes. And the causes, the main ones, are in that person, that monkey, that ant, that dog, that human, that python, that Hitler, that whoever. The causes will be found right in here. No need to look out there at all. So we need, therefore, to understand two things. Karma, the law of karma, and in order to understand the delusion, the second cause, and the two of these, karma and delusion, subsumed to the one, the actual cause, the actual main cause of suffering is the delusion, is the neurotic state of the mind. So in the first level of practice, the first scope of the Lam Rim, I like to call it junior school, very appropriate, we're learning about karma. And then on the basis of that, our learning is, because given that I don't want future suffering, I'm going to have to behave better. I'm going to stop killing, stop lying, stop stealing, stop cheating. It's kind of reasonable. Why? It's like giving up, I've got to stop. It's like the analogy is giving up eating sugar, giving up smoking cigarettes, because I don't want the future suffering. That's the first reason to have is the basis of practicing according to the law of karma. Not because you be a good girl, not because you get rewarded, not because you're afraid of punishment, which is the childish way we think about these things. We grow up, we take responsibility, Of course, this is not easy for us, and we haven't heard much about this before. It's a bit of a shock to us, Excuse me. So, the law of karma, a natural law, no one made it, Buddha has observed it, and any one of us progressing using the same methods that Buddha did, we too can observe it. It's there because it's natural law. It's there, it's existing right in front of us. No one made it up. It's crystal clear, So we have to understand the law of karma. I think we're going to go into detail, isn't it, the weekend? It's the same topic for the weekend, Martin, isn't it? Martin, I can't hear you.
Yes, same topic.
Okay, we'll unpack it all in the weekend. Okay. So so briefly here, the first bit is karma. The second bit is the mind. Action and the mind. And the mind is the boss. The mind runs the universe. The mind causes happiness. The mind experiences happiness. The mind causes suffering. The mind experiences suffering. The mind is the boss. External are just there, very real, but they're secondary. This is a shock for us materialists, philosophical materialists, you know, just shock. And that's why the Buddha's expertise is the mind. It's a shocking thing to hear this, because when we think, again, when we think spiritual, we think, oh no, spirit, soul, something mysterious. Not like that. Buddha does not talk this way. He has no word other than mind. We have consciousness or mind. It's got the grossest level, conceptual, sensory, negative, positive, emotion, feeling, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, this entire spectrum of our inner being, that is mind, that is consciousness. And it's much more tasty and more subjective, right, than we ever think about mind. Buddha does not argue that we've got a brain. It's just not his expertise, that's all. He's not interested in the brain, you know. He talks about the mind. And that's where, if understanding already what we've talked about, the application of this approach to life is immediately, it cuts out so much drama. I mean, if we are fixated or believe totally that the external world, the external events, the people and the things of the past are the main cause of my happiness and suffering, it's obvious that's what we have to investigate. That's why we're preoccupied with looking into the past. What happened to me then? Why did this happen? Because we're looking for like a needle in a haystack, aren't we? But what happened to Robina when she was 3 or 4 or 2, when she started to get angry or she started to get jealous? Why is it she's, getting jealous and angry now? We assume automatically it's rooted in the past. Well, for Buddha, it is rooted in the past. It's called past karma, my life, but it's still me, not out there. So when you're applying the Buddhist approach, it cuts, it's like, there's nothing wrong with going to your therapist. I mean, go to your therapist, please. There are marvelous therapists around. There's nothing wrong with investigating what your mummy did to you and all the stuff that you've suppressed since you're a little girl. We need to do that. It's very helpful for us because we're so afraid of so much stuff. We do bury it away. And that can be helpful to us. But in the end, what it should trigger is whatever's going on inside your mind. But the Buddha's approach is incredibly direct. When you study Buddhist psychology, we might notice this difference, but it's massive. When we study Buddhist psychology, you are studying only the mind, the actual states of mind. It's a highly complex system. It's amazing the way they present the workings of the mind, this actual cognitive process itself, the way the mental consciousness functions. It's incredibly sophisticated. It's incredibly fascinating. And it's got nothing to do with learning about what a person does to you, what happened when you're a little girl or a big girl for that matter. That's not relevant. We can learn to know our mind intimately, subtly, deeply, and radically change it in our own mind. It's very powerful. It's very direct, I tell you. We know the words anger. We know the words attachment. We know the words jealousy. But we don't have really clear definitions. We've got nobody agreeing on these definitions in our culture. But the Buddhist one is so precise, So this is the second level that we have to really comprehend. The first junior school is understanding karma, and then go to the next level of practice. Now we start to unpack and unravel the main causes of even why we do things with our body and speech, which is karma. And that is what's going on in our mind. And that's the boss of everything. This is where we must become our own therapists, as Lama Yeshe puts it, So powerful. So I think let's have some questions now, and we're going to go more detail the weekend about karma and the mind, because this is explaining samsara and therefore concluding of how we can then achieve our nirvana, So any questions? Any old questions? Start the ball rolling. Well, exactly. But the point here is, there is a system for being able to eventually know it all, isn't it? Like it's as if you're not a doctor. You go to your doctor, you have no clue about nutrition. And this doctor can look at you and understand perfectly well your past eating habits, which are going to cause you to get, lung cancer or diabetes in 22 years. But if you don't know eating, if you don't know nutrition, you can't see that. You're completely blind to that, aren't you? Would you agree with that first point? So listen, the point is this. If you don't know nutrition, if you don't understand why it's happening, and you can't see the consequences coming, can you? Would you agree with that?
I agree.
So that's why you go to an expert, you go to the doctor, you go to the nutritionist, and you trust them because you've checked up on them. So of course you're going to have to believe them, aren't you? But the belief is not blind belief. The belief, you don't believe in your nutritionist because she looks cute. You believe in your nutritionist because you know you've checked, she's got the knowledge, so you can take what she's saying with confidence, and then you can start to apply it. But you know yourself, that nutrition system is there for you to learn anytime you like, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree.
But it's the same principle here. It's the same here, of course. Yeah. But it's so the difference between having faith in God, I'm not criticizing, I used to have faith in God, is that I can never prove what God says. That's the worst sin of pride. Whereas the Buddha says you can prove all of this eventually, but you've got to start having confidence in it because you don't know it yet. It's the same with Einstein. You can't possibly prove E equals mc squared when you don't even know how to add up 1 + 1 is 2, but the system is there for you to prove it. We're going to go into more detail the weekend, but for sure, the Buddhist idea is, this law of karma, like any law, if you just hear about the law of botany, you know that it's a law that will have to just apply wherever there's growing things. The law of botany applies, doesn't it? And everything, and it's logical, and it's coherent, and it's consistent. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
That's the first point. So whatever sentient beings experience individually, first of all individually, is necessarily the fruit of what they put into their own mind in the past. So your life is like your garden. This will be logic for every sentient being. Everything any sentient being necessarily experiences necessarily is the fruit of actions in the past. It's just a natural law. First point.
Okay.
Now, we're very social beings, aren't we? We live around other beings. We even got to go to some mother's womb to get a life. We have sisters and daddies and aunties and uncles, and we live in very social environments. We're living in relation to others. So then we have very strong history with each other. There's no way in the universe, anybody you meet whom you feel close to, of course you do, because you've got a strong history with them, and what you're experiencing right now, which is feeling good, is the fruit of your collective virtue with that person. If you meet some people, you can't stand the sight of them. You immediately hate them. They harm you. That's the fruit of your collective, your karma with that person, but the result of your negative actions in the past. The very way even people appear to us is in terms of how they have treated us in the past. So it's again, this is natural law. There can't be a random event like this, which is very shocking because we think life is random. We think it's good luck. We think it's bad luck. No causes. It just happens because we don't have this explanation. I mean, it's just how we think, isn't it?
Yes.
Good. Who else? Anybody else? Questions? Any old questions? No questions. Yeah, that can be easily. Of course it can be true. It's not made up by their mind. There are beings called spirits who harm people. Just like there are humans. If a person comes up on the street and beats you up, I'm not going to try and convince you that you made that up. You didn't. That's nonsense. So equally, if there are other beings, as Buddha would assert, living in different realms of existence, and a very common one is these beings in the spirit realm, whom we have very strong karmic connection with, who harm us, but at a subtle level. This is totally normal and totally common, and they're not made up by the mind. They're real. They're external.
And in terms of someone who's experiencing that and differentiating those two, one that's basically a projection.
So if it is made by their mind and they're paranoid, then it's not real. But there's sometimes the common experience, and Tibetan doctors can even just see it. Even when they look at they test your urine, they can even tell if you're being harmed by spirits. So yes, another person who's labeled schizophrenic in our culture, it might just be their own mind. Or, you know, one of the commonest experiences of suffering in the world, isn't it? People have all these conspiracy theories. The government's trying to get them, and they're seeing people coming out of. That's really the person's own mind, paranoia. But other people are literally being harmed by other beings. That would be the Buddhist explanation, very clearly. And it's hard to know the difference. So the Buddha's explanation karmically of why you believe everyone's trying to get you, that's from harming others in the past. So you have this very strong paranoia and feel you can't bear being around other sentient beings. They're feeling they're trying to harm you. It's a result of a lot of anger and harming in the past. So it manifests as that experience now. But the one of the karma of being harmed by spirits, that's not uncommon. There's lots and lots of stories of things like that. Are we communicating?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, someone else.
Hi, Venerable Robina. Just to tag along on his question. So you said could be a spirit in a different realm. So does this mean that we're all living in parallel realms and you could manifest as somebody punching you, but it's a spirit in a different realm?
As I said before, Andrea, there are many Buddha would assert different realms of existence of living beings. And they're really just, I mean, at the moment, if there are different realms of existence, it's a bit like you know, all these science fiction movies talk about different dimensions, you know. There are beings, I said, there are certain beings called humans and there are some called animals. And we seem to share the same universe, don't we? You know, you're on the ground at the same time as the ant. But at the same time, simultaneously, there are many spirits and many hell beings that are all real beings living in the moment, but have a completely different set of reality. And it's not as if you can get an aeroplane to go visit them. It's a different, literally different dimension, but they're real beings living right now. So a kind of spirits is one's incredible suffering of incredible grasping and attachment. And a very common way that some spirits harm humans or harm animals is that due to this, let's say you got a ex-husband and you fought all the time and he was mean and ugly and he used to beat you up and hate you, and then he dies. Due to his strong karmic connection with you, he could get reborn literally and possess you. People who hear that they're possessed, I mean, of course, in the West we think they're stupid, but they are literally being taken over. The mind of your ex-husband, who's now a spirit in it's a very suffering realm, can literally, because of his karmic connection with you, drag towards you and will really be able to literally harm you, even cause you sickness and literally take over your body. There's not uncommon. There's many descriptions of this. So that's a real being whom you've got strong karma with, but who's born as a spirit and so harms you in their particular way. Do you understand? Can you hear that? Good, darling. And there's so many, I mean, you see, when we dream, it's interesting. In the Vajrayana system, they describe we've got gross consciousness, which is our day-to-day conceptuality and sensory. But then we have this subtle consciousness, and that's our dream mind. And many people have clairvoyant experiences during their dreams, and many people can see, especially in their dreams, can see beings. Because you normally, I mean, this house will be full of spirits. You go to places, spirits are everywhere in our environment, like around the animals, in the trees. And these spirits are usually, in the Buddhist view, very suffering beings. Well, we can't see them, but some people can. They've got the karma to see them and to be affected by them, and it can be very scary for some people. Do you understand? What else, people? Questions?
Yeah, we have one more here.
Good.
Yeah, it's me again with a question. Of
Who are
course,
you?
I have to.
May I know your name?
Huh?
May I know your name?
My Swedish name is Lena.
But what is, you look like a nun.
Yeah, I am. It's Ludrolamo.
Lujulama, happy to meet you.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to meet you.
Good.
Yeah, of course. I think I have to address the coronavirus thing.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah, of course I have to. Well, in a way, I feel it's not real, you know, it's not real, but what is real? And of course, on a relative level, people suffer, people die, and that's of course horrible. But in a way, it's not real. And well, how to get around it and what to do with this whole thing. I mean, it's a collective karma, this, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
Very samsaric one, isn't it? So please say something about it.
Of course, exactly. I mean, of course, at the ultimate level, you know, Anila, at the ultimate level, you can say not real applies to everything, but let's just keep it ordinary here and talk at the conventional level, not get it confused with the ultimate approach, you know. Let's look at conventional level, which is the idea of karma, that if we look at every moment of our experiences, individually or collectively, is the fruit of our karma, both created individually by all of our minds, but often in groups. And that's really what's happening now. I mean, lots of people, you know, I hear that hundreds of thousands of people die every year from flu, but because it's not called an epidemic, or it mightn't have been at that time, we don't think about it. And of course, because there's no vaccine now, then it's infecting the whole world, right? So I mean, collective karma means simply you do a certain action as a group. Let's say you're generous as a group 42 lives ago, and then 42 lives later, this year, you win the lottery. 5 of you who've never met in this life before, but you all win the lottery together. You all share that 10 million krona. That's collective karma. But it was from 42 lives ago. You created the cause then, as a group, and inevitably, inexorably, you will get the result. So at the moment, it's a very powerful one. I mean, collective karma means you get, so, you know, Swedes have certain collective karma. People in Stockholm have collective karma. If there's a flood in the one street in your neighborhood, all those neighbors had that collective karma. But you can see at the moment, it's a vast one attacking the whole planet, you know, whether it's, we mightn't all die from it, we mightn't even get the disease, but the implications of it and the effects of it and the fear that's been engendered and the economy is collapsing. It really is being experienced collectively very powerfully by the 7 billion humans, not to mention all the poor animals. So it's the result of collective karma. And so, okay, this is now, I think, is appropriate. We'll go into more detail in the weekend. But we need to understand how karma ripens. Of course, if it really is a natural law, as Buddha is telling us, even just botany, you can learn the simple principles of botany, but if you're really the most sophisticated botanist on the planet, you'd be unbelievably brilliant. I mean, look at the sophisticatedness of botany, how things grow. To learn to know exactly what temperature at that moment, that particular thing happened, so that the leaf turns that particular color. It's almost impossible to know, you know? Well, karma's like that. And only finally, when we're omniscient, can we see the workings of karma. They say it's so complex. But we can learn the principles of karma, you know, it's very powerful. So, because then you can apply it. So there are at least 4 ways that our past actions ripen in the present, and indeed 4 ways that our present actions will ripen in the future. Now, if you look at your lives, you'll recognize these 4 things. And it's just a way of describing your entire life. Well, the very first one is the type of rebirth we get. So already this is a surprise to us because we think our mummy made us, or we think God gave us a soul. And we certainly do not think that what I have done has created me to be who I am. That's the wackiest idea we've ever heard. Because as far as we're concerned, we began in our mother's womb and we're the handiwork of a creator or mummy and daddy. But the Buddha's got a third view. He says, no, baby, your mummy and daddy, yep, they give you a body. How kind they are. But the main cause of our consciousness from the past finding its way logically and inexorably to my present mother's human womb when she hopped into bed with my daddy, that was clearly the result of a powerful action of non-killing in a past life, practice in the context of a spiritual path, and even more specifically, as Lama Zopa says, practice in the context of keeping very powerful vows of non-killing. Just being good is not enough, he says. So just getting a human body is like winning the lottery, even though humans are a load of rubbish. Look at us, you know. But we've got access to virtue. It's the best rebirth to have because we can use it to practice. This is the special thing we've got, if we're fortunate. So just to even for our mind to be programmed to find its way to our present mother's human womb at the time of conception, the main cause of that, not mother and father. They're lying there having sex and we come barging in, you know. We've got some karmic history with them, no question. But the cause of it is our own past virtue. We created the cause to get that particular mother and to get a human body. So that already should blow our minds. First of all, that's that. Now, the second way karma ripens, the second track of karma, if you like, is if you look into that human body, you're going to find all kinds of humans. You've got the spectrum between Mother Teresa and Hitler, haven't you? You've got the maniacs and you've got the saints, and we're somewhere in between there. So what we're describing here is the second track of karma is the tendencies in that mind of that person. And look at, there's Hitler's tendencies. You can see by his behavior what his mental tendencies were. He's a maniac, he had delusional view, he harmed many people, completely full of pride, full of rage, full of attachment, a maniac. That's his mind. That's the second way karma ripens, which is all of our personality traits, our tendencies, our characteristics, our being good at music, our being good at football, our being good at making money, our whatever it is, our own personal tendencies, our mind itself. Main cause of every bit of what's in my mind, they're a bunch of habits. That's the simplest way to put it. We're born with a bunch of habits. Whose habits? My habits. Not mummies, not daddies, and not grandmas and grandpas and the monkeys, but they're my habits. Mummy and daddy might share them. We've got a karmic connection. My mother was good at music, you know? And when she saw her little Bobsy, me, she saw that I had a tendency to be good at music. Well, the logical answer we have is, oh, that's because mummy's genes came into Robina. No, the Buddhists view the main reason my mother's good at music is because she must have practiced it in a past life. And the main reason Robina's good at music is because she must have practiced in a past life. So that's my tendency. So that's where it's my anger, my jealousy, my love, my intelligence, my kindness, my being good at football. They're my tendencies. And what's the source of them? My habit of having done them before. It's not complicated. The third way our karma ripens, and look at this. We all live in a world full of human beings and people and creatures and ants and dogs and rats and cockroaches. Look at us. This is the third track of karma. So the first one is called the fully ripened result, the type of realm you're born into. In our case, human, not spirit, not hell being, not animal, not God, human. We created that. Second, our personality traits, our tendencies, our good qualities and bad qualities, my bunch of habits. Now, third, you go beyond yourself and look at where you live. You got mummies and daddies and people and rats and cockroaches. And if you look between now and the time you were born, you could divide all those people into two categories. Those that have harmed you and those that have helped you. Think about it. Friends and enemies. That's it. And they often swap. They change roles. That's clear. But this is called the third track of karma, in other words, is called the experiences. The first one is called the fully ripened result. The second is called intentions or actions or tendencies similar to the cause. The third kind of karma is called experiences similar to the cause, which is the way you're seen and treated by others. Look at your life, you know. Experiences similar to the cause. And the fourth is actually called environmental karma. And this is a bit more abstract, seems kind of odd, but there are explanations of it, of course. The very way the physical world impacts upon you. So there are four ways that your past actions ripen in the present. And so one example, who asked me that question? Where's the person who asked me the question? I forget now. Who were you? Who asked me the question? Was it still? Oh, was it still? Was it? It must be. I think it must be your question, Anila. Yeah. So still talking. Yeah. So when we understand these four ways that karma ripens. So you look at, for example, let's say you've got in your mind a tendency to never tell lies. And then but you've got the experience of people not believing your words. This is so common. We get so shocked. Why don't they believe me? I'm telling the truth. Someone at work is convinced you did something wrong and they don't believe you. This is where we get so shocked. If you're telling the truth now, but someone doesn't believe you, of course we feel it's unfair. What did I do to deserve this? Nothing. You didn't now. It's past karma. I mean, I use Mr. Trump as an example. I read in the New York Times yesterday that 90% of Republicans in America believe Mr. Trump more than anybody when it comes to coronavirus. 5% of other people believe him. So all the people who believe Mr. Trump, that's because he's got the karma with them of telling the truth. It could be 1,000 lifetimes ago. So it's past life stuff. So often in our lives, what happens to us has got very little to do with what we've done now, which is why we suffer so terribly, you know. Or why, say, for example, you win the lottery. You didn't do anything. You've not been generous all your life. You've even been mean, and you suddenly win $1 million. It's like, that's why we call it good luck. It ain't good luck, honey. It's from your past generosity. So everything that is in your mind is from the habit of doing it before. Your human body is the fruit of your past virtue. Everything that happens to you, all the good and all the bad, you just look at the experience of what's happening to you now and you go, wow, I must have done that before. If it's a good thing, you go, wow, this is great. I better keep doing it. So if you've been given gifts, if you get gifts, don't just greedily think you deserve it. Aren't you lucky? No, think this is the result of my past generosity. This is unbelievable. I must not waste it. So keep giving, please, because you'll keep receiving. If you start hoarding it, you'll end up being poor next life, or even poor next week. So everything we experience, this is the most powerful way to apply karma every day. We tend to see the world, as Lama Zopa puts it, as just it exists out there from its own side. I'm this innocent victim and all these bad things happen to me, all these good things happen to me. No one knows why. This is schizophrenic, I tell you, as Lama Yeshe would put it. This is because we don't understand emptiness. When we really understand emptiness, that everything, as Lama Zopa says, everything we experience is our karmic appearance. Whatever's out there, you hear a lousy sound. That's the result of negative karma, such that you get that environmentally, that a sound attacks you. If you get sick from eating food all the time, that's the environmental karma of past killing. If you live in a place where everything is very pure and delicious and the water is lovely and the food is delicious, that's because of non-killing in the past. If you live in a place that's stinky and smelly and rotten and horrible and ugly, that's because of sexual misconduct in the past. If you live in a place where nothing grows and it's ugly and horrible, that's because of lying in the past. Everything we experience environmentally, at the hands of others, in our own mind and our own life, we are the main cause. It's kind of powerful. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls it, it's like self-creation. When we start to own this, your life is transformed. You know why you are what you are. You know why things are happening. And now you know the action. If you get lied to, you go, oh my God, this is terrible. I must never lie again. If you get given gifts, you go, wow, this is fantastic. I must keep giving. If you get stolen from, you go, wow, I can't believe this. I must stop stealing. You get the learning from it. You don't just go, oh, I'm a bad person. I'm a good person. That's ridiculous. It's a very dynamic view, and it's rooted in dependent arising and emptiness, I tell you. So that was my long answer to you, Anila. You didn't answer your question or not. So coronavirus is this massive entire world manifesting. So it's not just the result of, so sickness itself is the result of killing, but most of us won't get sick. So what else is there? It's also, if we suddenly lose our job, that's the result of stealing. If suddenly the whole economy of the world collapses, that's the result of miserliness and stealing and not being generous. Some people, some companies right now, the food companies, they're going to get rich out of this situation. Many people will lose their jobs and become poor, and many people will get rich because the karma's different, there's one guy I read about in the New York Times who sells beans, he sells beans. He says at the farmer's market, he's always the poor boy that no one ever comes to. Now he's bombarded with business, 1,000 sales an hour. He's making so much money he can't believe it. He feels guilty. So out of the coronavirus, he's getting rich. Somebody else is getting poor. So the results, the dynamic results are different for so many people, but it's very much a collective experience, but many different causes from the past for us all. Do you understand, people? Anila?
Yes, thank you.
We understand karma in these 4 ways. It really helps. Instead of just saying, oh, it's karma, we've got to be more precise, Environmental karma is the way the physical world impacts upon you. Your own experiences at the hands of others, that's very particular karma. Your own tendencies, and then your own humanity, whatever. It's 4 ways. It's very powerful. It really helps to sort out what is happening and why and when, and then you learn from it. You learn from it. Like you live in your garden and you learn from it. You don't go, who put those weeds in my garden? Why aren't there flowers in my garden? I deserve flowers. That's how we think now. It's like ridiculous. It's your garden, baby. Your life is your garden. This is so powerful. Yeah. What else? I need more water. Nothing else? Okay. I'll keep talking. Yes, sweetheart. Yes, Jessica. Oh, Jessica, were you the one just? No. Hello, Jessica. Happy to see you, darling. Yeah, very clear. Perfect question, darling. So I've said it, I've just touched on it briefly, but I'll say it in more depth. Okay. Right, so that question for you, which is the question we all have, obviously comes because most of us, I mean, we don't have the capacity to remember many things, do we? Even in this life. I mean, we don't even remember, you know, there you are, you guys, about 7:30 p.m. or 8:30 p.m., whatever it is for you there, Ingrid. You're probably like the rest of us. If you had to account accurately for every moment of what you thought and did today, you probably have forgotten 99%. Would you agree with that? Would you agree with that point, Ingrid? So then why would it be surprising, even that alone, that why would that be surprising for you? That, I mean, you know, naturally we don't have the capacity to remember everything even today. Forget about yesterday, forget about this entire life. And that what that's pointing to is something that we think is natural, and that is, but the Buddha's explanation, based on the Buddha's view of the mind, is that that's the level of consciousness that's called gross consciousness, which is the sensory and at the certain gross level of conceptuality. And we can see we just don't have the capacity to remember most of what we did and said. And even when we do remember, it's often mistaken, you understand? So we're not surprised by that, are we? It's just normal. Would you agree it's normal? Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
Right.
I agree with that.
Most of this life. So all Buddhists, and then we're going to take the view, as I'm saying, Buddha's view is that your consciousness is not only, does not function, your mind or your consciousness, and these words are used synonymously, which is this capacity for cognition within you that is not itself the brain. It is a separate part of you that is merged with your body, that's intimately related to your brain, and the brain is necessary for you to function at a sensory level and at the grosser level of conceptuality. But so what the Buddha's saying, he's accessed, and these Indians before him were the ones who invented this technique called single-pointed concentration, shamatha, this ability, to access subtler levels of your own personal subjective capacity for cognition. We have subtler levels of mind, Ingrid. We never touch them. We don't posit them even as existing in modern neuroscience because they don't depend upon a brain, and we don't posit them as existing in psychology because it's just not part of our experience. So that's why, I mean, this is a brand new idea to us. Who's heard of this? We've never studied Indian philosophy before. We don't know it, but this has been around for thousands of years. And right this minute, there are people looking like you and me in the mountains, metaphorically or actually, developing this single-pointed concentration, accessing this subtle level of mind that isn't dependent upon the body, that is not dependent upon the brain. Are you hearing my words so far?
Oh, yes, I do.
So far. Okay, good. So this level of mind is accessible to any one of us by doing this technique. It's right there. So the point about this level of mind, this level of cognition, because it's subtler and is infinitely more powerful, and its ability to cognize things is more capable, so it can cognize phenomena that our gross conceptuality and gross sensory cannot, which includes the minds of others. It includes the past. It includes the future. This is in all the literature in Buddhism. It's in all the literature in the Hindus before that, and it's the natural experience of anybody who's accomplished single-pointed concentration. That you literally have got the ability to cognize phenomena that we normally can't because you haven't accessed that subtle level of your mind. That's just a natural thing. In other words, that includes clairvoyance. It's one of the natural consequences of accomplishing single-pointed concentration is this incredible capacity for clairvoyance. As I said, seeing phenomena that our gross consciousness is not capable of. But because we don't posit this in our culture, we just think it's weird and mysterious. But this is completely in all the literature for thousands of years, and it's all there, and the technique is still a living, real technique. Are we communicating? Ingrid, are we communicating?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
We've got these subtle levels of mind. So we have to deduce that Buddha has access to this subtle level of mind. So everything he's telling us is based on what he's observed with his subtle level of mind.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I will think about this.
Of course. I mean, and he's not asking you to believe, I'm not asking you to believe this, but it's all there in all the literature, has been for thousands of years. It's an extant, real technique. But it's so surprising we've never heard it before. Of course we're not. And then we think it's religion. We think it's weird. But I'm just telling you, that's all. And that as we progress spiritually and lessen all our delusions, which we're going to talk about this weekend, then we develop even more powerfully the capacity to extend that capacity to see the minds of others. And the only reason to have this is to be of benefit to others, to how to help them. This is a fundamental point that's in the whole Buddhist view, you know. So of course it takes time to hear it, but it's all there in the literature. Anybody who wishes to study it, it's all there for us. You understand? What else, people? So at the moment, all we're doing then, obviously, is talking, presenting Buddha's teachings based upon his findings, based upon these principles. And that's up to us whether we decide to take it as our working hypothesis or not, you know. That's the point. It's up to us.
So, Venerable, there's also question in the chat from...
Good.
So the question is, what about eating animal products and karma? Does it produce negative karma?
I understand. It's a very good point, yeah. I think we've got to look at it in a much bigger way. I think it's a very big point in the world, but let's look at it from a bigger perspective, okay? The Buddha's view is, if, like I said before, and forget about other realms of existence, that we even just think of this planet. I think it's fairly evident, and we can prove this with our microscopes. There are billions and billions and trillions of living beings pervading the universe. I mean, our body is a walking zoo. Even just under your armpit is like a zoo of living beings. So even if we stopped walking, stopped opening our mouth, stopped eating, stopped drinking, we'd still be slaughtering sentient beings just by existing. So the Buddha's taking this bigger picture, and you can see the very nature of samsara is so much suffering that just by existing, we harm so many sentient beings. So the general point in the Buddhist one is, given that we're harming sentient beings, the very first thing we can do is at least strongly develop the clear intention to try not to harm sentient beings. And we're going to go into much more detail about karma tomorrow, but the crucial point about karma is everything we think programs our mind. So just having the thought, I will try not to harm sentient beings, it doesn't just go in one ear and out the other. You program your mind with that intention. That's unbelievable. You're guiding yourself. And if every day you wish not to harm, and then you live in a vow not to kill, not to lie, not to steal, this is the best we can do. What more can we do? So then you're going to avoid harming that ant, that dog, that rat, that human, whoever. And that absolutely. So then we look at the business of meat eating. It's a very big emotional topic on our planet. Well, I mean, for very good reason, the meat industry is destroying the planet. It's an whole other dimension of it now. I mean, 1,000 years ago, it wasn't like that because we didn't have the technology. But now we can see the monstrosity of the meat industry. It's very clear that not just merely personal karma, you know, but it's a worldwide thing. But nevertheless, I think it's really necessary to look and see that even if we don't eat meat, and even if we only eat vegetables, I'm sorry, don't think you're such a saint because you don't eat meat. You're doing something good for the planet. But what about all the vegetables? I mean, I always remember this story. I always quote one scientist in Victoria in Australia, and this must be everywhere. He was just talking about this particular wheat field where they grow wheat, obviously. And what for? Wheat, probably 20% for the bulls, for the meat eaters, and then 80% for the vegans and the vegetarians. But, you know, during the off season, millions and millions of cute little mice live there. He said they were so cute. He had photos of them. He said they sing love songs to each other. And of course, when you have to grow the wheat, what are you going to do? You don't care. You slaughter the millions of mice. Now, if we're getting all very holy, I remember one time on Facebook and a person was shocked because something or other, and I quoted this story, and he just said, oh, you can't help that. I mean, that's beyond stupidity. What do you mean you can't help it? Millions of mice died for the holy vegans and vegetarians. I mean, that's just really shocking. So what I'm getting at is it's more than whether you eat meat or not. It's way more. It's way bigger than that, you know. I mean, so because, you know, but I think because we're so attached to food, we're very obsessed about the eating part. It's not just eating, you know, it's everything. Just by living, we're harming. I remember checking up on Google about how many creatures die on the road when you drive a car. And this guy in Holland had done the research. And just on the number plate, it's like trillions of little bugs per kilometer, per car, whatever. So whatever we do, whether we eat or not, we're harming sentient beings. So the broader picture from the Buddhist perspective is to, as much as we can, try to have the wish at least not to harm as much as possible, to do whatever we can not to harm. That's the bigger issue. And of course, we can't not harm. It's not possible. But to have the intention not to harm, that's where the power of karma is. And we'll talk about that more next tomorrow. Are we communicating? Person on the chat, I hope that gave you some food for thought.
There's another question from the chat here also. Is then single pointedness the only technique / meditation we need?
No. There's far more to it than that. In Buddhism, we'll go to this more in depth in the weekend. In Buddhism, there's basically two modes of meditation, two ways of using our mind in formal, what's called meditation. So the first one, which is coming from the Hindus, it's not even a Buddhist technique. These genius Hindus invented this, and it's known as shamatha in Sanskrit, which is in general translated as calm abiding, which is the result of this skill, brilliant, subtle, focused level of consciousness beyond the gross level, beyond the sensory, beyond the conceptual, as I'm saying before to Ingrid, that we don't even posit as existing in our culture, which is why it sounds mysterious to us, you know. So that subtle level of mind is super powerful, I mean, in the weekend we'll discuss it a bit and I'll quote from Lama Yeshe's book called Mahamudra, this wonderful book of Lama Yeshe's, and he talks about some of the characteristics that you'd have if you had accomplished single point of concentration. So single point of concentration for the Buddha is merely sharpening your knife. You don't just look at your pretty sharp knife. Now you've got to use your knife to do something, and that's the second mode of meditation. Or it's like, if you like, it's like developing a microscope. You've single point of concentration. You now have cultivated this brilliant microscope of your mind that's subtle and blissful and clear and sharp and is super capable of seeing the mind at a much more profound level. So you use that microscope to go to the second mode of meditation, and broadly speaking, that's known as insight. So it's not that complicated. We make it complicated. Insight's a very good word in English. I don't know in Swedish what you use. In other languages, I know there's no real equivalent. But in English, it's a very common word we use in day-to-day life. And the word is very literally what it shows. Insight, inner seeing. So, you know, when you understand something, you go, oh, yeah, I got some insight into that. Meaning it's not just intellectual, but you've got a taste of it. You know, you've thought about a problem, and now you've got some insight into why it's happening. Insight's a great word. So insight is what we have to cultivate. So insight into what? Well, finally, insight into the ultimate way that the I exists. We'll go into that. But insight in general, as far as Buddha is concerned, the way he presents his worldview, karma, for example, consciousness not being physical, past lives, future lives, the view of emptiness, the view about bodhicitta, the view about all Buddha's view, the nuts and bolts of Buddha's view, which for us are completely foreign because we don't have those views. For example, I think my mother made me. If I'm a Christian, I think God made me. That's a view that I've got right now. Buddha's got another view. So if I'm trying to be a Buddhist, I want to get insight into what Buddha's saying. Why? Not just so I can believe it, but so I can see it as he sees it and get the experience of it for myself. My teacher at school will tell me that 1 + 1 is 2. I've never heard of such an interesting idea before. And she will go home and she'll say, go home, Robina, get some single point of concentration, and then go to the second mode of meditation, and I want you to get some insight into this problem. So all she's saying is, go home, Robina, do your homework, think it through logically, and the penny will drop, and you'll go, oh, I get it. Now I understand 1 + 1 is 2. Well, that's what insight is. You're given something in there intellectually first, you think it through logically, and then that will trigger the recognition of the truth of it. Well, that's what Buddha wants us to do about the entire view of reality. And because his key reason is this, and I haven't even stated this yet, we're going to go into this tomorrow, is he says the key reason that we suffer is because we are not in touch with reality. Literally, he says we've got this mind full of misconceptions about the ultimate way things exist, about how we think things are permanent, whereas they're impermanent. We think our mother made us, whereas Buddha says she didn't. We think a creator made us, whereas Buddha says he didn't. We think our mind is the brain, where Buddha says it's not. I mean, he's got a different view of the universe. And he's saying getting in touch with this view, seeing the reality of impermanence, the reality of karma, the reality of emptiness, the reality of bodhicitta, getting in touch with that reality, insight into that reality at the subtlest level of your mind, which is most potent, that's how you become a Buddha. That's how you achieve nirvana. That's how you achieve liberation from suffering. So there's formal meditation techniques that enable us to do that. But the job is to change our mind, to unpack and unravel the misconceptions, chuck them out, and get our mind to be in sync with how reality is. That's what meditation is. And you do it every day. You're not sitting with your legs crossed and your eyes closed. Time to go home. Let's do a 4-minute Mahamudra meditation. Katya. Oh, Katya, I was asking a question. You coming back tomorrow, Katya? You can ask tomorrow, darling. Let's hope you're there. Okay, so I'll mention Lama Yeshe's book tomorrow. It's wonderful. And this first mode of meditation is concentration. But the difference in Mahamudra meditation, which is a marvelous method for realizing emptiness, ultimate reality, and we can discuss tomorrow, you don't watch your breath, for example. You simply watch your mind. You watch whatever pops up in your mind. And it's a bit mysterious to us initially. So we'll just be very natural, close our eyes, just sit there, very natural, and with strong determination for about 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, 4 minutes, quality minutes. We make a determination. I'm going to pay attention to whatever pops up in my mind. Don't try to bring thoughts. Don't try to worry about the thoughts. Don't try to change the thoughts. Don't try to stop the thoughts. Don't discuss with the thoughts. Just sort of like you're watching television with no commentary, with strong determination not to get distracted. You simply pay attention to whatever pops up in your mind. Okay. Keep your mind sharp, not distracted. Just pay attention to your thoughts. Keep your mind sharp. Just watch. Pay attention. That was 3 minutes, okay? So 3 minutes quality is better than even 10 minutes spacing out. We'll discuss meditation more tomorrow. So it's 3 quality minutes. How amazing. So we just think here we've been for a couple of hours. As many moments as there have been is as many seeds we have planted. Nothing has gone astray. This is very marvelous, actually. So we think even though we don't remember most of it, all those thoughts have gone in. They've left an impression in our mind. We've sown seeds in our mind. So we think, may we nourish these seeds from this moment forward with our effort, with our practice, never giving up on developing our amazing potential so that we can be a benefit to others. That's the whole idea. And to have confidence and courage. We'll discuss this more tomorrow. We'll go into the mind in more depth tomorrow. Changchob semchog rinpoche, ma kye panam ke gyochig, kye panyampa me payang, gong ne gong du babasho. Ke wadi nu dudan, lama sangye drogyune. Drowa chikang malupa dei sala gopasho. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to see you all in Portland. I'm going to be up at 4 in the morning for you guys. I like getting up early anyway, so it doesn't matter. Okay.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you, Venerable.
Bye, darlings. Thank you so much. Love you.
Thank you so much, Venerable. Have a good night.
Thank you, darling. Everybody, much love. Goodbye. I want to leave you now. See you, sweethearts.
And thank you so much for organizing that. This is awesome. It's always amazing.
Yeah, I think it's completely amazing that so many people just showed up from all over the world. I'm humbled and happy and yeah, fantastic. Thank you, everyone.